Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface, where we focus on social, Islamic and political issues. Joining us on the show is Dr. StephenSizer, who is an author of 2 books on Christian Zionism. We'll be reviewing his second book, Zion's Christian Soldiers, and focusing on the 4th chapter, Battle for Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jews. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Is the situation that's taking place today in Jerusalem something that the Zionists want to do in order for the Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel?
I believe it is. I believe the Zionists for a whole generation has had an agenda to secure control of Jerusalem entirely within Jewish hands. And the problem always has been the presence of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in what was East Jerusalem. The first initiative the Zionists took in 1967 was to unilaterally annex much of East Jerusalem and bring it within the boundaries of Israel. This was rejected by the international community as illegal. East Jerusalem is Arab, the old city of Jerusalem is Arab, as it was before 1967. But the Israelis absorbed it within the municipality of Jerusalem and imposed its law. So Jerusalemites lost their Jordanian citizenship, and they kind of are living in between Palestinian citizenship and Israeli. They pay taxes. They must prove that they work in Jerusalem, that they live in Jerusalem, but they don't benefit from the same level of services as Israeli Jews do in West Jerusalem. So those living in East Jerusalem pay the same taxes, but they don't get the same refuse collection or roads or pavements or cleaners or access to water and so on. So life is a two-state, it's two levels. But what the Israelis have done since '67 is built settlements around Jerusalem to ring fence and cut East Jerusalem off from Bethlehem and Jericho and so on, and then fill in and demolish Palestinian homes and expand the settlements. So today there are more Israeli settlers, squatters if you like, living in East Jerusalem than there are Palestinians. So that's been one of their agendas, to change the facts on the ground, to Judaize East Jerusalem. The second has been to deny any possibility that Jerusalem would be a shared city, that it could be a capital for the Palestinian state. So they've deconstructed and destroyed much of the social services, the community services that existed in East Jerusalem. So if you live in Bethany, which is only about 3 miles from the center of Jerusalem, they built the wall through the middle of Bethany, and half of Bethany must now go to Bethlehem for its municipal services. And that's been true of many other Arab suburbs that have been split down the middle. In the United States, the Zionist lobby is campaigning for the USA to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And the way that they're doing that is simple. They are seeking to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that's all it will take, because embassies are in the capital. And all the embassies, the foreign embassies, are in Tel Aviv. They're not in Jerusalem. There are no embassies in Jerusalem. There are consulates in West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem because it's seen as a divided city. But if the US moves its embassy to Jerusalem, that will be the end of the two-state solution, the end of the possibility of Jerusalem being a capital of Palestine, because every other country will have to do the same, because America will twist the arms of other nations to move their embassy to Jerusalem as well. So as long as that doesn't happen, there's hope that Jerusalem will be an international city or a shared city between the two countries or two capitals. But that's not the Zionists' agenda. And the final plank, if you like, they're repopulating and depopulating it with Palestinians. They're seeking to move the US embassy. The third is the Haram al-Sharif, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The aim is to destabilize to create tension and for the religious Zionists to build or share the Al-Aqsa Mosque as a synagogue and a mosque. I believe this is a deliberate provocation to force Palestinians to retaliate, to resist, and it leads to greater violence, and then that gives the Israelis all the excuse they need to impose greater levels of military control in Jerusalem and expel more Palestinians and further their agenda to make Jerusalem the exclusive, undivided, eternal capital of the Jewish state.
But then when we're to look at Jerusalem, you're saying that it is shared.
It is at the moment.
It is, yeah, at the moment it's shared. However, the Palestinians there, they are paying the taxes, they're following the Israeli law, okay, but they're not actually treated equally.
So it's not shared. No, you're right. It's not shared, but it's still. This possibility is there if the international pressure is put upon Israel, we might see an improvement. But I'm not optimistic at all because of the agenda. The fourth element, which I forgot, was the building of the light railway. The Israelis are building connections with the settlements to draw them into Jerusalem. So there are exclusive roads which only Jews can drive on, and the light railway, which increasingly, and the buses, which are increasingly only for Israeli Jews. It's harder and harder for Palestinians to use them. They have separate buses, separate roads. It's a segregated city, basically.
It's like when you're mentioning this, it's reminding me of the slavery time where there were buses in certain transport just for the white people, and then there were others just for the black. Isn't that just kind of like the same?
It is, and we must call it what it is. It is a segregated, racist policy, and increasingly, people in the West, through the media and through social media, are realizing that what is being created is not going to last because it is unacceptable.
Recently on BBC, after the war which took place over the summer, the BBC had on their website a map of Israel, and it actually had Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and it was only when thousands and thousands of people, they sent a lot of letters and everything until they changed it, and they changed it kind of like, if it wasn't spread around the social media, none of us would actually know.
Well, that is the power of social media. We've got to do that. Be vigilant whenever we see, for example, Israel promote tourism to Israel and use photographs of Jerusalem as if it's in Israel. And again, we use the Advertising Standard Authority, the ASA, and make complaints whenever Israel uses the old city of Jerusalem as evidence of that it's in Israel. It's not. We've got to keep doing that to remind people that it is a divided city and a city that is increasingly depopulated. What the Israelis are doing, every 2 years, Palestinians have to renew their residence permit, and they have to prove that they not only live there but work there. And the struggle is that increasingly there is less and less work, there is less and less schools, and so on. And so more and more Palestinians who are Jerusalemites have to work either in Israel or in Palestine, or they go to school in Palestine, university. And so it becomes like a revolving door. You can leave, but you can't come back in. And the agenda clearly Israel has is to depopulate East Jerusalem of its Palestinian citizens. Who
do they have to prove themselves to?
The Israelis.
No, meaning the Palestinians living in Jerusalem.
They must prove that the majority of their lives are lived in Jerusalem to the Israeli authorities, who control East Jerusalem.
So in a way, like, even though it hurts me to say this, but in a way, Israel does have power over Jerusalem.
Oh, definitely. It already does. And its agenda is to empty East Jerusalem of its Palestinian citizens.
But it is doing that, though.
Yes.
And everyone's kind of quiet about it.
Well, not everyone is quiet.
Well, there isn't as much voice about
No.
Jerusalem as a whole
as there
like,
should be.
Yeah.
No, I agree. But again, we have to go with what we've got. And there is an organisation called the Council of Elders, which includes people like Jimmy Carter and a number of other well-known retired politicians from Ireland, from America, from Europe, who are speaking out about Jerusalem and what's been happening in the suburbs of Silwan. For example, Silwan is just below the old city of Jerusalem, and it's a major Palestinian village, but the Israelis have confiscated properties. They're trying to turn it into a park for Israel because of its proximity to the old city of Jerusalem. So they're trying to demolish homes, claim more of the archaeological evidence points to their residence there 3,000 years ago, ignoring the residents that had lived there 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
So they're just doing what they were doing before, which is basically making people run out of their homes. And
more controversial still, the authorities responsible for the Haram al-Sharif are worried that Israel is tunnelling under the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Clearly there are archaeological excavations down there, and in a sense it is hollow, because it is when Jerusalem is built on a hill, and they put this large a platform, the Temple Mount at the Haram al-Sharif is full of rubble underneath in order to make it flat, on top of which we have the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So by tunnelling underneath, it's in danger of being destabilised. And then they will say it's an act of God, and we've got to go in there and repair, and that gives them the chance to rebuild.
So rebuild their own temple, basically.
Yes.
But you mentioned that they want to try and make the Al-Aqsa as a place for both the Muslims and the Jews. Do you think that would actually work?
No, it won't work. But that doesn't stop them trying. They achieved it in Hebron. They achieved it at Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem. First of all, it was shared, and now it's exclusive. Muslims can't get there. And I fear that certainly it's been discussed and I think approved within the Knesset, that they will, you see, until about 10 years ago, the leading religious council in Israel forbade Jews to go onto the Haram al-Sharif for fear of stepping on the location of the temple, which was holy ground. And so Jews were not allowed up there. They weren't allowed. But as Judaism has been hijacked by Zionists, the rabbis from the settlements who are committed to rebuilding the temple are asserting their right to pray on the Haram al-Sharif. And it's one thing to walk up there and mingle as tourists and say a quiet prayer, to taking it over, or part of it over, to build a synagogue. And I believe that will be the first step toward destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque and building a temple.
But then, like, with images that we tend to see on mainly Arabian and Islamic channels, they used to show a lot of Jews praying next to Al-Aqsa. It'll be like, they wouldn't actually step inside, but it'll be mainly outside the walls and everything. And that was something that, many Muslims, and you can see them, like, welcoming them and allowing them to do so, because the Muslims themselves have Al-Aqsa as it's the third holiest site within Islam. So, they didn't mind the Jews praying outside, and they didn't even mind them coming in, as long as they still have that mosque there where they can go and pray and everything. Do you think that the Muslim people, and hopefully also the Westerners and the Christians, would also be supporting the Muslims in this, but do you think they're going to be uprising if Israel was to remove or demolish the mosque?
I don't know what will happen. I think that I don't think the Israeli authorities would dare do it, but I think they could turn a blind eye to terrorist attacks or someone planting explosives or trying to destroy the the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because then that will give others the excuse to come in with soldiers and build something quickly that could then form the basis of a temple. I think that settlers, religious settlers, extremists, have that as their agenda. They're certainly training future priests for a temple. Many of the yeshivas, yeshiva means a school, but it's not for children, it's for adults, it's for men who are training as rabbis to serve in a future temple. So it's very likely that it will happen. The question is whether it ignites a conflict, a global conflict, between Muslims who feel that their site has been desecrated and those who are trying to change the status quo.
You mentioned that the rabbis before didn't allow people to go and actually walk in the location of Jerusalem because of its holy
nature.
Yeah, its holy nature. So how come they're quiet? Like, why are they not getting up and saying, please, don't go to that area because it's holy. If you want to do a prayer or something, just go around it or something along those lines.
I think there's been a change within Judaism in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a hothouse. It's drawn more and more extremists, more and more radicals into Jerusalem, and therefore the coexistence between the different groups within Judaism has shifted quite radically in that part of Jerusalem, with Mir Sharim, for example, and its proximity to the old city. More and more religious Jews who identify with Zionism feel that it's their right to live in the old city. So you see more and more houses are being bought secretly, surreptitiously.
Really bought,
well, some are being bought, some are being occupied, and they're kicking out the Palestinian owners. They're certainly protected by private security firms and Israeli soldiers. So there's a demographic change within the old city as more and more settlers take over. I fear that an attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque is increasingly likely now that the Knesset is getting behind the idea that Jews should be allowed to pray in that location. It was 2 weeks ago the Al-Aqsa Mosque was closed to Muslim worshippers the first time in 40 years or whatever, and within a week the first time Israeli soldiers entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque, allegedly looking for people that they felt had committed criminal offences. It was the first time they went in, I believe, as soldiers. So there's, it's like the tide coming in. You can see it getting closer to, God forbid, the day when they take over completely the Haram al-Sharif. In 1967, when Israel captured Jerusalem, the old city, the people like Moshe Dayan, they had to decide what to do about the Muslim shrines, and there was the suggestion made that they be destroyed at that time, because here was our chance. We've taken over, let's get on with it. And that was resisted, and I think many Zionists regret that.
Of course, thank God they didn't do anything to the holy shrines then, but I find it quite weird that they didn't actually do anything in that time that they had. But then what about so this is just going to be continuing. We've seen it for many years. And when we're to look at the map of Palestine, how it was, before during 1948 and what it is now, it's just tiny in comparison to what it was. So in the next few years, is Palestine going to be there? Yes, we recognize it as a state, but is it still going to be existing?
Well, I believe so, because I don't believe that the international community will allow the Israelis to get away with it, and I believe we will see more resistance within the Palestinian community. Israel is, in a sense, has got to handle Arab Israelis as well as West Bank Palestinians, as well as its international image, as well as the citizens in Gaza. It's having to defend itself on a number of fronts, and we only have to look at the tragic events of the last few weeks. Most of the deaths that have occurred within the Jewish community have been perpetrated by Israeli Arabs, not West Bank Palestinians. And you're dealing there with 3.5 million Palestinians, I think, in Israel and in Palestine. We're dealing with a large community of Palestinians who, until now, have been peaceful, largely peaceful, and seeking to live alongside their Jewish neighbours.
Many people, not just the Muslims, the Christians as well, believe that Jerusalem is holy, as it has a lot of historical context. At the same time, it's a very spiritual place for people to go to. Isn't Israel, doing a lot in the sense that it's provoking them to become violent? Yes, you said that the majority of people are peaceful, but then what they're doing isn't really allowing them to keep that peace within them.
Well, I believe my understanding is that the Zionists who are seeking to exert their exclusive control over Jerusalem and over the Haram al-Sharif really have no interest in the aspirations, needs, wishes, hopes of Christians or Muslims, because they want it exclusively for themselves, and they will use whatever means necessary to achieve that, whether it's criticizing people like us in the West for being anti-Semitic because we criticize them for what they're doing, or using rubber bullets and tear gas and live ammunition to target those that are resisting their occupation.
You mentioned that the International Committee isn't going to allow what Israel is actually doing to Palestine, but it's allowed it all these years. How come, what makes you think that they're going to actually, stop Israel from committing more crime?
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the God of justice will inspire a sufficient number of leaders around the world to warn Israel and discipline Israel, and if necessary punish Israel for its actions. Israel is a trading nation. Israel depends heavily on the international community for its trade, for its social network and so on. More and more boycotts of Israeli goods, Israeli services, Israeli leaders will, I believe, help persuade the Israeli leaders that they must compromise, that the trajectory that they're on is leading to self-destruction and is not in the best interests of Israelis or Palestinians.
We really hope that the politicians actually reflect on themselves and start standing up for justice. But then when we are to look at the Western politicians, like Obama, for example, when he was asked about the situation that's actually taking place in Al-Aqsa today, he just said that Palestine and Israel should start negotiating and come to a solution to solve the problem. Do you think that's the only way forward?
No, of course not. I didn't see that quote, so I can't really comment on it. But Obama reflects the political leadership in Israel, in the United States, but the consensus of Israeli society, media, its foreign service, its those involved in its military, its security, all have a different perspective and recognize that destabilizing Jerusalem, destabilizing the relationship between the Muslim world and Israel will have ramifications for the United States as well. And therefore it's in the best interest of the USA to find a peaceful solution in Israel-Palestine and pressure Israel to stop its greedy, aggressive, self-centered behavior toward the Palestinians. We're talking about rumors that the US will not veto criticisms of Israel in the United Nations. we've got increasing influence within Europe of politicians critical of what Israel is doing. Even in Britain, Ed Miliband, who is the prospective leader of the future government if the Labour Party wins, has been criticised by Zionists because he has been advocating for a solution that doesn't fit with their agenda. So I think there are encouraging signs that change is occurring in the West in relation to its attitude to Israel and to Palestine. The question is whether we have enough time to bring peace before it's too late.
I really hope so. But then when just, thinking of the Zionists, they have Tel Aviv and they have many other cities that, they've taken over from the Palestinians. What does Jerusalem mean to them, and why do they want to just take over that? Why are they passionate about Jerusalem?
Well, Jerusalem was the capital of Israel under the monarchy, under David and Solomon, and Jerusalem was the centre for their worship and the place of the temple. So Jerusalem is important to Jews, probably more important to Jews than it is within Islam. It's probably equivalent to Mecca for Muslims, but that's not to denigrate the importance of Jerusalem to both Christians and Muslims. It is an important city, which is why from the mid-19th century onwards, the international community regarded Jerusalem as special to all three faiths and advocated a solution whereby Jerusalem would be a shared city under special jurisdiction, given its special status to all three faiths. And I would argue that needs to be respected and needs to be implemented if we're to see the status quo maintained. But we're not there because of Israel's very aggressive stance.
So the Jewish people believe Jerusalem is, another holy place for them according to the Bible or their Jewish scriptures, the Torah?
The Jewish scriptures and their tradition. They see Jerusalem as very important. That I wouldn't want to disagree with that or denigrate that, because the three faiths have so much in common. Mm-hmm. It's natural that we would also have Jerusalem in common too. Jerusalem is big enough for the Jewish community to build a temple in West Jerusalem. It's got plenty of Christian sites that are revered and Muslim sites. And we can learn from one another's traditions and appreciate how God has revealed himself, and we can learn more about him from these locations, but we have to share them.
Of course, and just thinking Jerusalem, if it was actually a shared state, the Muslims and the Christians are sharing the state and they are working together. But if that state was also shared by the Jews, wouldn't it just set that example that the three faiths actually, came from one another and represent that? And it's not just a historical thing that we would all say, but it's something physical for everyone to actually see and notice.
That is an aspiration, but that won't be achieved as long as Israel can get away with its Judaization of East Jerusalem, the ethnic cleansing, the home demolitions, the settlements, and the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the impediment is Zionism itself, not Judaism, not the aspirations of Israeli citizens per se, any more than Palestinians. But that's why we've got to address the causes of the tension and conflict and resolve those if we are to get to the point where the three faith communities can actually share those sites.
But then why do they want to destruct the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Pardon?
Why do they want to destruct Al-Aqsa Mosque? Like, why do they want to
Because it's in
that?
the way of where they believe the temple needs to be built. The problem is that we don't know where the temple was because it was destroyed by the Romans. Mm-hmm. When the Haram al-Sharif was, if you like, cleansed by the Romans, they built pagan shrines on it, which were, it was used as a rubbish dump. Under the Christians, the site was left derelict. So when the Muslims came to Jerusalem and built the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, it's very likely that the Dome of the Rock is over the place where the temple was situated, because it's kind of in the middle of the Haram al-Sharif. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is over here in the west, very close to where the temple steps entered the Haram al-Sharif. So I believe it's the Dome of the Rock that's most vulnerable, rather than the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So that's the problem. We don't know where the temple was.
So they're just kind of like assuming that it's, not just assuming, because I imagine they would have done the historical research.
Yes.
But they believe that it's actually in the location of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the...
Well, there are 4 different locations. You'll find Jewish archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists, who posit 4 alternative locations for the temple. One of them is under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of them is under the Dome of the Rock, one is slightly to the northeast, I believe, and one is less popular, is down in David City, which is near Silwan. So then there's no consensus within Judaism as to where the temple was, and therefore it's going to be a little bit of a guess if they start to build it. But I believe that Judaism as a faith does not require a temple. For thousands of years, Jews have prayed, have fulfilled their religious rituals. They've used the Western Wall as a place of prayer, and I believe that's the equivalent of Christians praying wherever they are living. We can worship God wherever we are, but the Zionists really have no place for either for Christianity or Islam, particularly when it comes to Jerusalem and the Haram al-Sharif. So I do believe the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are under threat.
They are under threat because of what Israeli soldiers and militias are doing, today, and how they're forcing, it's not forcing, but banning the Palestinians from actually going to pray. And thing is, like, when we look at the situation and understand, with all my respect to the Jewish religion, that they also have, their religious duties to pray and to be in a temple. Because however much we do say that you can pray wherever you are, and we all do that. The 3 religions do that. We don't have to be in a mosque or in a specific location for our prayers to be accepted. However, there are certain areas that when we go to them, we personally feel spiritual. So
yes.
We feel a bit more connection with
Yes.
God when we're to pray and stuff.
Yes.
So I understand that, but then to destruct, two very important holy places for the Muslims and for the Christians, just for them to have a temple, isn't that kind of going against the whole idea of spirituality?
Yes. Yes, I believe it is. But we're not dealing with spirituality. We're dealing with the racist use of religion to justify what is an exclusive political agenda. The ethnic cleansing of other faith minorities is not something exclusive to Zionism. It's been perpetrated against the Armenians, the Kurds, the indigenous North American Indians, the Aztecs, the blacks in Africa, the faith minorities in Iraq and so on. Tragically, it's a reflection of our human nature, and it follows a long line of notorious previous attempts to ethnically cleanse land that's been occupied or stolen. So Zionism in its agenda is merely one example of what humanity has done to humanity over thousands of years.
But they're just like showing it to us in the new sense, meaning like we used to hear like my generation mainly used to hear before about the Holocaust and stuff, but then we've never actually seen it. Yes, there are a few clips and stuff, and you can go to many museums where there would be a lot of,
artifacts and things.
They have everything, like even their diaries and stuff. But what we see today in Palestine is actually, another version of it.
Yes, and the difference is today the world media is observing, and the international community is more being more proactive to stop it. The North American Indians had no other benefactor; they had no one to come to their rescue, and at least within the Christian and Muslim traditions, as well as the Jewish tradition, there are many advocates for justice and peace in Israel-Palestine who are advocating for the Palestinians and who are protesting about the way the Zionists are behaving.
Why did the prophets criticize the people of Jerusalem?
The prophets, and Jesus in particular, had very strong language to use to describe the people in Jerusalem for a number of reasons. Jerusalem became very wealthy and prosperous compared to the surrounding areas. It was where the middle class or upper class lived, and the rulers were expected to care for all of God's people, and at times they were only concerned with themselves and with their lifestyle, and so the prophets were highly critical of the people in Jerusalem for their moral deviance, if you like. It was often associated with pagan sites on the hills around Jerusalem, pagan deities who were worshipped there. Jesus had some very strong words for the people in Jerusalem because they'd rejected his message. On one occasion he said, just like a mother hen gathers her chicks, how much I've longed to gather you in my arms, but you were not willing. And he said, therefore the time will come when the armies will surround you. Instead of my arms to protect you, the foreign armies will surround you, and they will plunder you, they will kill you, they will destroy Jerusalem. The followers of Jesus in the first century remembered those warnings of Jesus, and they got out when they saw the pagan armies surrounding Jerusalem. The Christians remembered the words of Jesus and got out, but the Jews of the first century who trusted in their army and in those who were trying to liberate Israel from the Roman occupation suffered terribly at that time in fulfillment of what Jesus had predicted.
So how did the coming of Jesus kind of like change the people who are living in Jerusalem?
Well, within Jerusalem there were those who recognized him as their Messiah, and they followed him, and he called them to be his witnesses in the rest of the world, and so they left Jerusalem to share that message with others. Jerusalem was destroyed between 66 AD and 70 AD, and between then and about 100 AD, Jerusalem was basically reshaped by the Roman occupiers into a new city, and the places of worship were destroyed, pagan shrines were built, and it was even given a new name, Aelia Capitolina. It was a Roman city and no longer a Jewish city. So the Romans crushed the resistance. I believe hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed by the Romans, and it was reshaped, so it would no longer be a Jewish city in the way that it had been before. So the prophecies of the prophets and Jesus came true literally. In fact, Josephus was one of the Jewish historians who witnessed these events in 70 AD, and he quotes the prophets and says it's coming true. So he saw the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the great suffering of his people as the prophet's warning coming true.
There are many narrations which state that Jesus wept for the people who lived in Jerusalem. Why was that?
Well, because he loved them, because he wanted them to acknowledge him and to worship him. to follow him. And when they refused, he wept. He wept over their hardness of heart. And that's why we should weep over Zionists today and ask God to soften their hearts, to see Palestinians as their brothers and sisters and not their enemies.
How do you think we should pray for Jerusalem today?
We should pray for the peace of Jerusalem. It's what the psalmist tells us. But I pray that the justice of God falls down like fire and brings a home for the Palestinian, and the mercy of God pours down like rain and protects the Jewish people, and the beautiful eyes of a holy God who weeps for all his children bring his healing hope to his wounded ones, to the Jew and the Palestinian.
Really hope so. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for joining us on the show, and thank you very much for watching Beneath the Surface. See you next time.